Welcome to the Lion's Share podcast, where we break down today's most impactful research and bring fresh insights from the academic frontier straight to you.
You know, if you're involved in strategy or innovation or human capital, you hear creative climate thrown around all the time.
All the time. It's become standard jargon.
Right. But how often do we actually treat it like the messy, fluctuating thing it really is, like hour by hour on a project, not just some score on a survey once a quarter?
Yeah, that's exactly the disconnect. Because innovation, it really happens or doesn't happen based on what individuals experience daily on that project floor.
And the old ways of studying this, the standard statistical models, they kind of hit a limit, didn't they?
Totally. They give you, the leader, these broad ideas, maybe, but no real insight into those crucial micro moments that actually push creative work forward or stall it completely.
So today we are doing a deep dive into a really interesting paper. It's by McKay, Mohan, and Reyna from 2022.
Ah, yes, the one using Amabil's data.
Exactly. They took this legendary, super rich archival data, we're talking thousands of daily surveys, and used a different kind of method. One that finally lets us see how that creative environment actually shifts, sometimes drastically, within the lifespan of a project.
And our goal here really is to unpack what they found, to translate these daily patterns they identified into real, actionable strategy for you.
We're going to look at 5 specific daily workplace experience profiles they uncovered.
And show what they mean for actually managing corporate innovation, for driving those entrepreneurial outcomes everyone wants, and frankly, for keeping your best creative people engaged.
Okay, so let's lay the groundwork. Creative climate. The classic model is Amabil's key EYS model, right?
Right, which basically says the work environment perception is built on 8 factors. These are split into stimulants, things that help creativity, and obstacles, things that hurt it.
Stimulants being things like freedom, challenge, good resources, support from the organization.
Exactly. The stuff we intuitively know is good. And the obstacles are the usual suspects. Crazy time pressure, organizational roadblocks, political infighting, conservative attitudes that shut down new ideas.
Woodman and colleagues called this mix the creative situation.
Which is a good way to put it. It is a situation, a mix of things.
But that complexity is the core problem this paper tackles, methodologically speaking. If you have 8 different factors all bouncing off each other, how do you actually study that?
Yeah, the traditional way, what we call a variable-centered approach, like your standard regression analysis, it just falls short. It forces you to ask narrow questions like, how does factor A predict outcome B? Maybe you add factor C as a moderator.
But you can't really see how all 8 things work together at the same time in a real person's day.
You just can't. Mathematically, trying to model, say, a 9-way interaction, it's not just difficult, it's often statistically nonsensical and impossible to interpret meaningfully.
It's like trying to describe a really amazing meal by just listing ingredients.
Exactly. You lose the actual experience, the overall flavor profile. You miss the gestalt.
So what did McKay and his colleagues do differently?
They used what's called a person-centered approach, specifically a technique called latent profile analysis, or LPA.
Okay, LPA. What does that do?
Instead of looking at variables in isolation, LPA looks for naturally occurring groups or profiles within the data. It identifies distinct subgroups of days that share a similar pattern, a similar shape, and level across all 8 climate factors simultaneously.
So it's looking for recurring combinations.
Precisely. For you, the strategist, this is the critical shift. We stop asking, does having more resources always help creativity? And start asking, what does a typical day look like when resources are high, but political hassles are also high?
It gives a much more realistic picture of the daily reality.
A holistic picture, yeah. And the data they used was incredibly solid. Over 11,000 daily surveys, hundreds of people across projects that lasted months. Really robust.
All right, let's get to the meat of it, the findings.
Yeah.
What profiles did this LPA method actually uncover?
They found 5 distinct daily workplace experience profiles. And the first big takeaway, maybe the most fundamental one for any manager listening, the environment is incredibly dynamic.
How dynamic?
Over 80%, 80 of the people in the study experienced at least 3 different types of these profiles over the course of their project.
Wow, so the idea of a single, stable, creative climate for a whole project is just wrong.
Pretty much, yeah. It fluctuates constantly. That fluidity is key.
Okay, so what are the 5 profiles?
Well, first, there's the baseline. The most common experience, happening about a third of the time, 33.7%, was the typical day. I mean,
Right.
everything was just average. All 8 factors were around the midpoint. And predictably, creative output on those days, also average, just sort of baseline productivity.
Okay, the benchmark. What's the opposite end? The best case scenario.
That's the ideal day. This showed up a good chunk of the time, too, nearly 30% of days. And this is the one you want.
Describe the ideal day profile.
High on all the good stuff. All 6 stimulant factors. Lots of freedom, challenging work, great resources, strong support, both organizational and from the supervisor. And crucially, low on all the obstacles. Low time pressure, low impediments, low conservative attitudes.
And the impact on creativity.
The highest. Significantly higher creative performance, both what people reported themselves and what objective coders rated when they looked at actual creative events described in the diaries.
This sounds like the environment people say they need for innovation.
It really is. And this connects directly to, modern innovation and entrepreneurial strategy. Think about building those insanely great teams Steve Jobs talked about, or the conditions needed for continuous delivery like Jeff got health advocates.
You mean self-sufficient teams, minimal roadblocks?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dedicated teams that have the autonomy and resources to just go without getting bogged down by bureaucracy or politics. That ideal day profile is the operational state that enables that kind of high-speed, high-output flow. It's a real competitive advantage if you can sustain it.
But obviously not every day is ideal. What were the other profiles? You said there were 5.
Right. So we have typical and ideal. Then we have 2 profiles linked to low performance. The absolute worst was the toxic day.
Oof, doesn't sound good.
It wasn't. Thankfully, it was less common, about 8% of days. But this profile was just brutal. Low on the stimulants and high on every single obstacle factor.
So max time pressure, max political fights, max conservative pushback.
Pretty much. Just a crushing environment. And yeah, creative performance on toxic days, dead last. Rock bottom.
Okay, that's one low performer. What was the other?
The other was the disengaged day, happening about 10% of the time. This one's interesting. Stimulants were low, like the toxic day, but obstacles were also low. It wasn't actively hostile necessarily. It was more like apathy, detachment, maybe a lack of resources or energy, or just feeling like your work didn't matter.
So not actively bad, just meh.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Like being adrift. And the result was similar in terms of output.
Right.
Low creative performance here too.
So combining toxic and disengaged, that's almost 1 day in 5 where creativity is significantly hampered.
Right. And think about the downstream effects that the study found something else important. These toxic and disengaged days, they often happen back to back.
Creating a negative spiral.
Exactly. Once you fall into that rut, it's hard to climb out. They rarely preceded an ideal day. So strategically, preventing these spirals from starting is critical for maintaining any kind of consistent innovation momentum.
Okay, that leaves one profile. Typical, ideal, toxic, disengaged. What's the 5th?
This one is fascinating and maybe the most paradoxical for leadership. It's the crisis day. Showed up almost 19% of the time, so fairly common.
Crisis day. What does that look like?
High energy, high challenge, high support. People are engaged, but obstacles are also sky high, especially political problems and contention. Resources were about average, but the friction was intense.
So high stimulants and high obstacles, like pushing hard against resistance.
That's a good way to put it. The fire is definitely burning, but maybe people are spending as much time fighting fires as they are building something new.
And what happened to creativity on these crisis days?
This is where it gets really nuanced. On crisis days, people reported feeling highly creative. Their self-reported creativity was statistically just as high as on ideal days.
Really? As high as ideal days?
Yep. They felt challenged, energized, creative. But when the objective coders looked at the actual creative events or outputs described, performance was only average, same as a typical day.
Whoa. Okay, so they felt super creative, but the tangible output didn't match.
Exactly. High energy, high perceived creativity, but only average objective results.
What's going on there? Why the disconnect?
The researchers suggest this aligns really well with sense-making theory. When there's a crisis, a perceived threat, high stakes, lots of conflict, people naturally respond with urgency and intense effort.
Right. Fight or flight kicks in.
Kind of. But that energy, that sense of urgency, might get channeled into just dealing with the crisis itself. Navigating the politics, fighting for resources, managing the conflict, trying to make sense of the chaos, rather than actually producing novel, useful ideas or solutions.
So the feeling of creativity comes from the intense effort and problem solving, even if that effort isn't directly resulting in more creative output.
That seems to be the interpretation. And that difference between feeling busy and creative versus actually delivering tangible creative value, that's a huge insight for anyone leading innovation efforts.
Absolutely huge.
Mm.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and talk about strategy. We know the profiles exist. We know they fluctuate. How can leaders use this? You mentioned stability earlier.
Right. The study looked at transitions between these profiles. Are some states stickier than others? And the big finding for strategic time management comes from the ideal day.
What do they find?
An ideal day has a very high chance, 76% probability of being followed by another ideal day.
Ah, so creative flow, once established, tends to sustain itself.
It seems so. It's
Yeah.
sticky. And that is a critical lever for you as an innovation leader.
How so?
Well, think about the pace of modern innovation. If your competitors, like, say, Amazon, are supposedly pushing new code every 11 seconds,
Right, that continuous deployment model.
then your ability to create and sustain sequences of those ideal days becomes paramount. It's what allows that rapid, iterative, small batch experimentation that defines so much of current strategy.
So the focus shouldn't just be on having some ideal days, but on building a system that maximizes the flow and minimizes interruptions that break that sequence.
Precisely. It's about protecting that flow state, not just hoping for random bursts of creativity between periods of struggle or fighting against the model year fixed release mentality.
That makes sense. What about the crisis day? What does this pattern tell us?
The finding that crisis days pop up somewhat randomly throughout a project's life, not just clustered at the middle or end, as some theories might predict.
Like punctuated equilibrium, where one big crisis supposedly shifts everything.
Exactly. This pattern lends more support to a different view of organizational life, sometimes called the negotiated order model.
Negotiated order.
Yeah, the idea that projects and organizational work aren't about long periods of stability punctuated by big crises, but rather a continuous process of negotiation, political maneuvering, and resource skirmishes. It's more iterative, more constant friction.
So for managers, this means
It means you can't just plan for one big midpoint crisis intervention and assume things will reset. You have to expect these resource fights, these political flare-ups, to be ongoing, almost normal parts of the innovation process.
and leadership needs to be about continuous vigilance and reframing.
Yes, constantly managing that friction, actively working to resolve the conflicts and resource issues that define those crisis and toxic days, rather than waiting for a single breaking point. It requires relentless attention.
Okay, final strategic angle. Human capital and culture. How do we intentionally cultivate more ideal days?
Well, the profile tells us what's needed. High autonomy, high challenge, good resources, strong support, and crucially, low political BS and conservative attitudes.
Which points directly back to leadership and culture creation.
Absolutely. It starts with vision. Leaders need to articulate that compelling common purpose that attracts the kind of self-managing, intrinsically motivated people who thrive in that ideal day environment. People who, as Jobs put it, want to write the book again, not just follow a formula.
And then give them the space to do it.
Give them the space, the trust, the resources, but also, critically, address the obstacles.
Especially the social and political ones that define the toxic and crisis days.
Right, and this is where diversity and inclusion become not just ethical imperatives, but strategic ones for innovation.
How so?
Because those political obstacles, the contention, the conservative resistance to new ideas, they often fester in environments that lack diversity of thought and psychological safety.
So diverse teams can actually help prevent toxic or crisis dynamics.
There's good evidence for that. Research, like Rocio Lorenzo's work, shows diversity boosts innovation revenue, partly because it brings a wider range of perspectives, a bigger box of experiences to draw on for problem solving.
But only if people feel safe to contribute those diverse perspectives.
Exactly. You need that psychological safety. A safe space for experimentation, where failure isn't punished, reduces the fear that fuels conservative attitudes and political maneuvering. It allows for that bottom-up emergent strategy that Gotthelf talks about. Fostering that safety directly counteracts the conditions of the toxic day.
So wrapping this up, the core message seems to be, stop thinking of creative climate as a static thing you measure occasionally.
Right. It's not an output of your strategy. It's a dynamic, daily, operational input that fundamentally determines whether your innovation strategy will succeed or fail.
And for you, the leader listening, the job becomes managing these microclimates day by day.
Yes. Focus your energy on creating the conditions for ideal day flow. build the mechanisms, the processes, the cultural norms, the leadership behaviors that protect that flow and actively interrupt those toxic and disengaged day spirals before they take hold.
It's a much more active, hands-on view of managing creativity.
It has to be.
Okay, let's leave our listeners with a final thought to consider, building on that tricky crisis day finding.
The one where people felt creative but weren't necessarily producing more objectively.
Exactly. If we know the ideal day delivers tangibly better creative output than the crisis day, even though both might feel similarly intense or creative to the people involved, the provocative question for you is, what specific systems, metrics, or leadership interventions do you need to put in place to ensure that the undeniable energy and urgency of a crisis actually get channeled into valuable, market-facing creative outcomes?
And not just burned up in political firefighting or frantic sense-making.
Precisely. How do you harvest the energy of the crisis without sacrificing the actual creative output? Something to think about as you look at how your own teams operate day to day.
Thanks for tuning into the Lion's Share podcast. If you enjoyed today's discussion, share it with a friend and join us next time for more ideas worth talking about. We'll see you next time.